In the spirit of Kujichagulia, or self-determination, the Delta College Department of Ethnic Studies proudly presents Profiles in Equity and Excellence, a virtual presentation series. This speaker series will highlight Black, Indigenous, and people of color who are professionals advancing equity, racial, and social justice efforts in various contexts. All students, faculty, staff, admin, and community are welcome. This session of Profiles in Equity and Excellence proudly features Rakin Hall.
VP Rakin Hall, who is the Vice President of Enrollment Management at Arcadia University in Glenside, Pennsylvania. VP Hall, I love saying that. I love how that rolls off the tongue. And I have known each other for a good number of years. Perhaps he might speak to that, but he is a higher education expert with more than 25 years of success and strategic management at 5 different institutions.
Yes.
His depth of experience covers large research institutions, medium-sized state schools, and small private schools. The breadth of his experience informs his thinking in addressing a myriad of issues and phenomenon within higher education. His expertise is within enrollment management, development, and student affairs. A little side note, we were both involved with the Educational Opportunity Program at Humboldt State University, our beginnings and origins. I was a student, I was a senior when he came in as a freshman. So yes. we go way back. Anyway,
a few months ago.
Many, many years ago. He's the first generation college student and an exemplar of excellence, absolute excellence. And he believes that education can be transformative and have an impact on all of our lives. And so I'm going to turn this over to our special esteemed guest. Thank you, VP Hall, for joining us today.
Thank you, guys. It's really great to connect with you. Dr. Williams, that was an incredibly kind intro. Thank you so much. As mentioned, my name is Rakin Hall, and I'm the vice president here at Arcadia University. And I want to start this talk off by kind of explaining my journey. I've always talked about the importance of leadership and also mentorship. And I've mentioned before that it's important to have mirrors of leadership being reflected back out into the community that reflect upon people who look just like them. So within my identities, I do identify as a first generation college student. I am a cisgendered Black male within the United States, within a nuclear family setting. And I try to understand how that reverberates as I move throughout life. A crux of my conversations, a crux of my talks, we really center around this intersection between emotional quotient and intellectual quotient, IQ and EQ, and how that frames leaders. So with that being kind of the preface of this talk, you know, I began my journey in 1992 at Humboldt State University. As a first generation college student, you know, I do believe that there is a certain beauty in the unknown. The old saying that ignorance is bliss. You don't know what you don't know. And coming in with a truly open, curious stance, I was kind of introduced to a lot of things. Ironically, one path was education. My first career was in broadcast journalism. But more importantly, I think within the wheelhouse of student affairs and development, I really got a chance to meet different people and really got to understand who I was as a person. I think a lot of what takes place within the first generation landscape is very tactical. Get up, brush your teeth, get out. But I think there's an additional layer on top of that that we really don't get into much later in life, the importance of showing up as a whole person and being locked in. Through my journeys at Humboldt State and the EOP office with really good people, Phoebe Smith and a few other people, I graduated and I began my journey within higher education at Humboldt State. Soon after, I got a job in New Jersey at William Paterson State University, was there for a couple of years, and again, gained broader exposure, I think, to different working groups, a different culture on the East Coast coming from California. And after William Paterson, I jumped back to Southern California where I landed, and I believe that's the zenith of my career at the University of Southern California, USC. I spent 13 years there as a Trojan and as an employee. And there I really focused on issues of equity, diversity, greater ways of inclusion for Black males within the sciences, for Black women writ large. I got to a certain point within that journey, I was being encouraged to grow, and I think within your journey, if someone encourages you to grow, you should really listen to that. And with that encouragement, I found myself at the University of Utah. And so we go from Humboldt State in Northern California, William Paterson in New Jersey, University of Southern California, and now the University of Utah. There, again, the topography, the culture, I think the history of the state, how it kind of came to be. I learned the importance of difference within that landscape. We talk a lot about, PWIs, and I would have to say respectfully, if you have not seen the University of Utah, you do not know what a PWI is. And I think as a Black professional there, what a rich environment to learn and grow in. I've always made the argument that as a Black professional, there are no sidelines. You're always within the fray. You're always in motion. You have to always kind of figure it out. You manage up, you manage down, you manage to the left, you manage to the right, you manage what's in front of you. And most importantly, you have to manage what's behind you. And I think within those lessons, I really learned the importance of being centered, of being still. I learned the importance of understanding and nuance and what it means to observe before acting. And before you knew it, a pandemic hit. And then I landed through a lot of twists and turns here at Arcadia University. And I've been here for about 3 years as the vice president. This is my smallest school professionally, but I think, the journey and the steps that I took at my previous 4 institutions really prepared me well for the rigors of what I'm going through here now. And earlier I was joking with Dr. Hollenside and Dr. Williams that experience makes leaders, and nothing makes a leader better than a bad experience. And within that, you really have to understand the nuance and what it is to grow within chaos. When I mentor young people, I talk about disruption, the fact that it's inevitable, but more importantly, you have to understand and learn how to digest it in real time. Earlier we were having active shooter trainings here. That's a new norm. That's unfortunate. But I had a really great conversation with one of the officers, and she says, well, what's the difference between, me going right into the police academy and, students who might go into higher ed? And I say, unfortunately, within the school of life, the test comes first. And depending on what the test is and how badly you fail it, that person might find themselves in front of you, law enforcement, or maybe in front of a judge. I think within the academy, we have the luxury, the privilege of theory. Students come to us and they're wide open. No crime, no harm has been committed. The worst thing you did was maybe play some loud music, and you got to talk to the student affairs officer, but you have the ability to learn and grow. And so I think from that aspect, to be within the academy to help to nurture and help students grow, I think it's one of the richest blessings I could have been given as a leader. I think, every night when I close my eyes, my greatest crime is that I try to make something better. And I think the worst outcome is that I might have gotten it wrong, but I am given the opportunity to come back the next day to make it better. And so within a lot of my conversations around leadership, around my conversations of emotional intelligence, intellectual quotient, IQ, the idea of readiness, the idea of, developing the whole self of knowing who you are, I think is so important, especially within marginalized groups, people of color, women within professional circles, especially within C-suite leadership, and our brothers and sisters within the LGBTQIA spectrum, however they choose to identify and show up. I still think there's a certain tax that's levied on you. And the best thing that you can do is really try to prepare yourself again for the disruption that will come, because it is inevitable. So just a quick intro into who I am and kind of my stance and my beliefs. And there you have it.
Awesome. Can you talk a bit about your preparation out of schooling, K-12, that got you to Humboldt, just that trajectory and
yeah,
that was shaped?
Well, it's funny. Again, going back to taxes levied, and a lot of the screens are blank, so I'm kind of spitballing here a bit. I don't know the phenotype and really the genotype of anyone on the screen. But going back to the taxes that are levied on Black bodies, I think, there is an expectation, again, to simply perform artistically, athletically, in some really harsh scenarios sexually. And I think, again, that kind of stifles your ability to kind of learn and grow. Within Black bodies, within Black minds, within Black children, the curiosity is stamped out of them so quickly. Everything is penalized. And for a good chunk of my life, that was kind of my walk. Every mistake, every misstep was just, you have to sit in front of someone. I think when Humboldt State came on my radar, it was a godsend. I was introduced to the university, again, through athletics, no surprise there. But after starting at Humboldt State, I quickly fell out of love with basketball. I enjoyed playing it in a recreational sense. I think I was maybe a stutter step below average, And I didn't think that it would be the hook to kind of get me through. And at that point, again, ignorance is bliss. I just didn't know what the other alternative is. And at the time, the coach there, his name was Steve Kinder, a really good man and a friend of mine to this day. Coach Kinder introduced me to Phoebe Smith within EOP. And I explained to Phoebe, I just didn't want to play basketball anymore. They had taxed my Black body enough. I wanted to work on my Black brain a little bit more. And, Phoebe and Patty and Lupe and all the good people within EOP, they really sat me down and talked to me about the importance of belonging and showing up. Through that, I landed a job as a tour guide within the enrollment office. And I joked that I perfected the art form of walking backwards, And through that, I started meeting different people, but really outside of the classroom, it was Dr. Edward Buzz Webb, who really, for the first time, I think saw me as a potential profession. I think up until that point, people had kind of got me over humps and bumps, but Buzz was the first person to say, I think you are maybe a bit bigger than you realize. I think you're a bit more than you're putting out there. And I had never taken a class with Buzz. I had never gone on one of his special field trips with other students. But whenever he saw me, he carved out time and talked to me. When I was interviewing for my first job, Buzz took me through a mock interview. I had never done that. I didn't even know you did mock interviews. I thought, again, Black bodies, I thought you just kind of showed up, cracked the dice and, wish me well, going for an interview. But the idea that you would practice for an interview, the idea that you would practice the art of walking in, shaking your hand, buttoning your coat, sitting down, never had any of that within my upbringing. And so I think, with respect to outside of the classroom, I think that's what really prepared me for the arena of life. To a certain degree, most children, but I think students of color, marginalized populations, we learn very quickly how to survive. And so the idea of school wasn't too nebulous to me. I walk into a classroom, I sit down, they stand in front of a board, they talk to me, and in 4 weeks, I got to tell you what you told me. Okay. I kind of got that. I've been doing that since kindergarten. So by the time I got to college, I just kind of ramped it up a bit. And so I really didn't find any true, pleasure out of that, for lack of a better word, because I was doing it kind of by rote. But outside of the classroom, within student affairs, outside of the classroom, I'm working with Randy Darnell Burke and Buzz Webb, and them giving me assignments and writings and real life kind of tangible things to do. I had a better understanding of what it was that I wanted to do within the broader lens. A much shorter way of saying this is that no one walks in wanting to be a vice president of enrollment. You kind of, work your way into it to a certain degree. And for me coming in as a first generation student, I didn't even know this was a profession to begin with. But I think my story is one of best case scenarios and outcomes, for someone to have as little as I had as a young person to then flip it and really, I think, maximize every opportunity is a blessing. You know, I acknowledge that I've been given certain perks that maybe another person might not have been given, you know, and vice versa. So I think outside the classroom, especially within a college setting, so much learning takes place. For the first time, I grew up in a fairly, you know, diverse, meaning Black and brown neighborhood as a kid. You know, Oceanside, California is a military town, a lot of Blacks, Latinos, a lot of my island brothers are there, you know, Tongan, Samoan, you know, and college was the first time where I kind of met cool white people, you know, if I can say it like that. And we just talked about different theories and ideas. And you could be curious within the space with next to no penalty. And for a young person of color, first generation, I think you really have to get comfortable with that because it's foreign to us.
I appreciate that sharing. And you speak about the power of those mentors who help to guide you towards becoming the professional with those early experiences and grooming, really, you at Humboldt. So I'm curious also, when you think back and reflect upon your community and family influences and how those groom you, can you give us some insight into young Rock?
Yeah, you know, to dial it back a little further, you know, God, you know, I was born into kind of a migratory family. You know, my mom, when I was a kid, I was born in South Bend, Indiana. And there was this corporation called the Bendix Corporation. It was a textile company. They made everything from handles to widgets, you know, any kind of plastic, you know, good they would make at Bendix. Well, it was the turn of the 80s. You know, for those of you who are too young, Reagan had come into power. The Iron Curtain went up, you know, so to speak. The bamboo curtain went down, so to speak. And a lot of jobs, industry jobs, went over to Asia. And so a lot of jobs went to Korea, a lot of jobs went over to certain parts of China. And when that happened, Bendix basically supported the town of South Bend, Indiana. South Bend, Indiana, you had the University of Notre Dame and you had Bendix. When Bendix left, the town just got gutted and it died. And so from that point, we started moving around. And so we left South Bend, Indiana, and then we went to Sacramento, California. We were there for a couple of years. And then from Sacramento, California, we went down to Oceanside, California. And throughout all of that, it was my mom, my oldest sister, my middle sister, and me, you know. And I think in life, you kind of learn two things from people. You learn what to do, but more importantly, you learn what not to do. And, you know, to be a young boy to a single mother who is trying to figure out the mores of life, feeding kids, trying to find love and date, you see a lot of losses come through the door. And watching my mom go through heartbreak, watching my mom go through job loss, watching my mom pack us up and us essentially being transit and going through home loss. I think, again, it taps down a lot of that curiosity. You can't explore, you have to figure it out. And I think a lot of that affected my framing as well as a young man. You know, I believe Trevor Noah said, if you ever want to know what it's like to be an American, talk to a Black woman. They don't have the luxury of, you know, effing around and finding out. And so to live with a single Black woman and two older female siblings, and you are the youngest male with the least power, I think it really causes you to button up and sharpen up much quicker than you probably should, you know. And I don't say that to garner any kind of sympathy. I think within life, a lot of strides are just unfair. Most roads are rocky. And I don't think what I went through is any more difficult than any other young kid, or, you know, God bless those poor children, you know, who are detained at the borders, you know. But I think that framing helps you think. And the one constant through all of that was my mom's support and my mom's love. You know, she was far from perfect, but she showed up every single day. And I think within that regard, there is a certain appreciation you develop. One of my favorite poems, limericks, I believe it's credited to Roosevelt. Forgive me if I'm wrong, but it's called The Man Within the Arena. And they often talk about, the glory doesn't go to the person on the sideline who critiques. Glory doesn't go to the person kind of snickering in the corner who laughs at the one in the arena who's fallen. Glory goes to the man or the woman within the arena. The person who is imperfect, the person who is bloodied, the person who is beaten, but the person who stands up. And the person who fights for tomorrow they may never see or understand. And in many ways, in a regular way, I very much saw my mother as that person within that arena. And so I think that frames your thinking. I think that frames, at a young age, I was called an old soul. At a young age, I think I'm pretty lighthearted, but I've always been told that I've been kind of serious and I kind of think up a bit, But again, experience makes leaders. And I think that's what's one of the unique things that kind of developed my acumen, so to speak. Watching my mom, like most of us today, simply try to figure it out.
Wow, I appreciate that. And I know I don't want to hog and ask all the questions, but I do have one, and perhaps this will help others generate their ideas for questions as well. I appreciate you reflecting upon the power of the family.
Yeah.
Because a lot of times, we don't give enough credit to those early influences and how profound our family and communities are in shaping our trajectory.
Yeah.
And so thank you for sharing that intimacy. Can you also speak about, because of course, this esteemed professional, journalism, broadcast major, well-spoken, well-versed, that was always you. Yet we know in the course of those journeys, we all experiences definitely the triumphs, but the challenges. And so when we think about young undergrad youth, can you speak to the range of those experiences and how you positioned yourself to basically move through those seasons?
Yeah, it's one of those things. I've always been able to find niches. Again, I think a while back, I said that I was probably a slightly below average basketball player. I was a slightly above average student. And I think within those niches, I've kind of found places to fit, I think that my ability, again, to kind of read a room and understand really helped me out. I think my emotional quotient was much higher than my intellectual quotient as a young man. I was very empathetic. I kind of understood when people were hungry. I kind of understood just by a look on somebody's face, if they were kind of having a good day or bad day, or if they just didn't feel like talking. And I think, as an early freshman, that allowed me to understand phenomenon and nuance. Again, I remember calling my mom when I got to college my freshman year. Back then, guys, there were no cell phones. So there was like a payphone, like in the laundry room of Siemens Hall. And we had this great network. If the phone rang, whoever's mom it was, we started screaming up the stairs that your mom was on the phone and you had to run downstairs and grab it. And so I remember talking to my mom on this phone, and she's, asking me, how was, college and how are things? And I remember telling her initially, God, they talk so different. They laugh at things I don't find funny. Where is Kenny Bunkport? What's going on? Do I belong here? I've often said that one of the biggest first steps in success is knowing that you belong. And a part of knowing that you belong is understanding how you fit. Not everything is going to be a circle. Not everything is going to be a triangle. Not everything is going to be a square. And I think, again, through rote, I learned how to sit in the class, listen, and kind of spit it out. I think like most marginalized children, it's always that saying, I don't do it as much anymore, but when I used to really work with first generation kids, the biggest hump you had to get past was, I don't got to study. I can just read it and remember it. To a certain degree, you're right. I get it. I have the same superpower, but you have to understand what it means to study. to disaggregate data, to dig in, to correlate, to connect dots, and it's much more than just kind of regurgitating information. And so I think as I understood the gap within that superpower of simply remembering things through rote, but really trying to correlate it to data and knowledge, that's where I first pushed myself to grow. And if we're talking about learning, a lot of you guys who are studying pre-K, this is nothing new to you. That's often traced in first generation students. The first gap in education is where you go from learning to read to reading to learn. Cat, dog, to the dog gets the ball. That's the first gap, learning to read to reading to learn. The second gap is quantitative. That's more 6th, 7th grade. A good number of young people are in, algebra 1, maybe geometry. A good bulk of them are still in, arithmetic. And then it kind of splits from there. And so in that vein, I understood my gap. I understood my gap was starting to grow. And it's kind of the old thing, you can fake it until you make it. It works until it doesn't. I think at each step of my growth, I understood what my gap was. I think I understood how to get over that gap. But more importantly, I started to understand that it's time to dig in. That, again, rote won't work. Luck is not a strategy. It might kick in a door on occasion. You might hit those numbers every now and again. But if your whole approach is just let me see how this lands, chances are you're not going to be too good at it. And so early as a freshman, Mrs. Chinello really worked and sharpened my writing. When I landed, I'm going to quote Method Man. I had a Rakim tape and a Batman comic book, and that was my world. That's what I knew. And so a lot of my language, a lot of my cadence of writing is like you were reading a comic book panel, right? And so Miss Chinello, God love her, Miss Chinello, she was tough. And hey, come here, you got something there, but you're lazy. And I'm lazy. She kind of pushed me, and I don't mean lazy. She says, "You got something, but why aren't you pushing yourself? This is bullshit." And I went to her office. She showed me this, and she gave me a couple of books to read. And I remember what she said to me. She says, "If you want to become a great writer, you have to become a great reader. You have to, at least for now, put the comic books down, and you have to get into some long form text. You kind of, absorb what you take in, but right now you're taking in Batman punching guys in an alley. You really need to take in some James Baldwin. You really need to take in some Richard Wright. You need to take in some J.A. Rogers." And that just changed my life. And I remember the first long form book she gave me because I was kind of, and it was this book, and I might get some snickers and some jokes. It's fine. But I remember the book was called Ice-T, The Ice Opinion. It was written by Ice-T, the rapper, Finn Tutuola, to the younger people. But Ice-T wrote this book called The Ice Opinion. And I remember within the first chapter of me reading that book, he talked about how the world is here for us. And he talked about how he came from the hood, and it was always kind of thought you had to stay, live, and die there and make what happened there happen here. And Ice talked about the first time he went to the beach. Ice talked about the first time he went to the mountains. And it just resonated with me that 1, I belong here, and that 2, I can figure this out, and 3, I can make it work for my benefit. And so I think that stance of curiosity, I think the ability to really listen to people, even when they, call your paper bullshit, it's very helpful. And it kind of checks ego. And I think throughout my freshman undergraduate career, that really stamped and defined my world at Humboldt State. And, Humboldt was small enough, it was removed enough from any kind of big city distractions that I think I really did have a chance to kind of cocoon a bit, and go from a caterpillar to a butterfly. And as pivotal as Humboldt was as an undergraduate, I think my next true big growth was when I got to USC professionally. You've never seen anything like the University of Southern California in real time. It's big, it's sexy, it's powerful. I've seen people there come and go. Some, understandably, some, that was kind of cold. But I think there at USC, again, you learn to study. You learn to watch really, really powerful people talk and walk. And the vice president there at the time, Dr. Catherine Harrington, I joked that Catherine could talk you into saving the planet or robbing a bank, the way she used words, you know, and I really loved hearing her speak. And whenever Catherine gave a talk, you know, for an event or an open lecture, I just kind of sat, you know, in the middle and just absorbed it. And I think just moments like that are rich, but again, you have to be open to the disruption of it. You have to be open to the nuance of it all.
Thank you for that. Donna V dropped into chat, what is a PWI? So you've been at a range of institutions. So can you help break down for our student audience these acronyms that we easily use these to speak about these institutions and how they're framed, and just, you know, provide some understanding about these differences and what these terms mean?
Yeah, well, a PWI essentially means predominantly white institution. Now, arguably, you could say every single institution under the sun is a PWI, you know, because you're north of what, 60% of you know, the main population of white people. Now, there are some variants within that. You know, most universities, their student of color population rarely broaches north of 8-9%. So again, by definition, most campuses are PWI. Now, if you have a campus at USC that's PWI, and again, a campus at the University of Utah that's PWI, I think it resonates differently. USC is in Los Angeles. It is a harbor city. It is on the ocean. It is an international port. The University of Utah is literally in the mountains of Salt Lake, a bit more isolated. And so I think it's just different. You know, on campus, you might feel a bit the same, but it's when you leave campus, it feels different. And so PWIs, I think, you know, it's descriptor that's really kind of come in vogue within the last, maybe half decade or so. I think it's a bit of a broad descriptor, but it holds weight. You know, I think, you know, you think of HBCU, historically Black colleges and universities, you know, those really came about during a time where, you know, people who look like me were not allowed to go to college, weren't even allowed to go to hospitals. And so I think within the HBCU space, traditionally, you have an overwhelming amount of African-American people of color. But even within those spaces now, you have some HBCUs who identify as NHI, National Hispanic Serving Institutions, given their population. And so I think within a pluralistic society, as things kind of ebb and flow, that's kind of the norm. And so PWI, predominantly white institution, HBCU, historically Black college, university. I think I might have mentioned within my job, you know, SEM, that's strategic enrollment management and building student cohorts. You know, I kind of jumped on the other side from being recruited to now I'm recruiting students. And again, like Dr. Williams said, there's a lot of alphabet soup out there.
That's right. That's right. Come on. Thank you for that. Other questions. And I appreciate Donna's willingness to drop her question in chat. If there are others who want to drop in chat or just speak out, feel free.
And Donna being on screen. Yeah.
That's right. And while we're waiting, we are an institution, of course, San Joaquin Delta College, community college, located in the heart of Stockton, a very culturally and linguistically diverse and rich community in that way.
Yeah.
We're an institution, 85% of our student population, a bit more than 85% are students of color. So we're a minority serving institution, a Hispanic serving institution, an Asian Pacific Islander serving institution.
API, yeah.
And I love that.
Yeah.
I love that. Yeah.
I have a love for Stockton. You know, moons ago, I was a finalist for, at the time, a director position at UOP. And it's one of those things in life that works out, that kind of works out when it doesn't. There was a gentleman there by the name of J. Michael Thompson at the time. We hit it off really well. He didn't offer me the position, but somehow we remained friends. And so in my vetting of Stockton, I have a rich understanding and appreciation of the diversity that exists there. And, you know, Stockton has had so many milestones over the years. You know, the youngest Black mayor at one point in time, the head of the concussion analysis, I forget the doctor's name, you know, he was in Stockton at one time. Mm-hmm. I think that the wealth of diversity that exists within Stockton, how could you not win? I think a good chunk of what goes on in Stockton within the agriculture industry, I think, you know, they're starting to attract some more medical industry there. Stockton, you know, it's one of those places you kind of describe as a real life Sesame Street. You know, you have people of all hues and colors. And again, in real time, you're all trying to figure it out. You're all trying to make sense of it. And sometimes that plays out beautifully. Sometimes it plays out a little less than perfect. But again, I think for those who are committed to dig in, it makes a lot of sense. And so I think the diversity that exists at Stockton is beautiful. That was part of my draw to come to Arcadia. You know, Arcadia sits just north of Philadelphia by maybe 5 miles. Philadelphia is the 6th largest city within the United States. It has the 32nd largest economy within the United States. Of course, California is number 1. But here it's medicine, it's education, and of course, industry still. I think like Stockton, you know, within Philadelphia in certain parts, we're working very intently to reinvigorate certain industries and business. I think one of the unfortunate things about diversity, and you can call it white flight, you can call it an erosion of services. But oftentimes, as things become more diverse, you see a repeal of funding and money. You know, we saw that in California, we've seen that in different places. And so it's that healthy tension of how do you bring industry and education together. I had a really good dinner a few weeks ago with some local university presidents, and I was very humbled to be there and represent Arcadia on my president's behalf. But a lot of the conversations were just around that. How do we better bring in industry and government and tie them to education? A good chunk of what we do is prepare students for a world that doesn't exist. When you and I were at Humboldt, there was no TikTok, there was no Skype, there were cell phones, but they wouldn't fit in your pocket. They're about this big. And so to think about where we are now, you know, with technology, with the globalization and the shrinking of the world through telecommunications, I believe that there's footing in Stockton. I believe that there's footing within Philadelphia for people of color to really understand the waves as they approach and break. You know, we talked about the divides that, you know, haunt us within education, you know, 2nd to 3rd grade and 6th to 8th grade. I think within the working world, for people of color to really have a firm understanding of technology, I think, you know, within every single space of higher education, you need to talk to young people about starting their own businesses, their own LLCs, and understanding how government works, understand how the IRS works when you graduate. I think there's so much that has to take place within those conversations to really prepare our students of color for a really fruitful workforce that is still burgeoning right now, but it is shifting. And so I think Stockton, again, it's a beautiful city. It's a beautiful area within one of the most beautiful, powerful states within the United States. And I hope there is continued conversation and good energy, you know, bringing industry there and really continuing to train up young people.
Thank you for that. I have a big series of questions in the chat for you. So this is from Dr. Hollenside. Are the stressors on students in 2023 different than 20 years ago? So that part, can you speak on how to navigate and overcome contemporary challenges as they relate to Latinx students, Asian students, Black and Native American students, and white students? So can you speak to that?
Yeah, I can. The first part of that question is definitely, you know, I think the stresses of 2023 are different than 20 years ago. 20 years ago, and this, even, it's kind of when I was right in the thick of it. If you think about communication, it was, very unilateral. You had maybe 7 or 8 different streams going at you. And so we were kind of force-fed certain information, certain propaganda. I think within 2023, information is, omnidirectional. It comes from all angles, TikTok, Zoom, phones, fax, TV, tablet, And so I think in that regard, students have to digest more quicker. There was a time you had to look for a magazine to get information. Now you can just say, hey, Siri, I'm not talking to you. The phone just went off. And so I think that the pace at which young people have to understand information, the pace at which they have to, to dissect it and disaggregate it, it must be, for an old guy like me, maybe a bit infuriating. But if you're born into the digital age, maybe that's just how you're programmed. Earlier today, we had an active shooter training. I didn't do that my entire schooling career, K-12, college, graduate school. I've never done an active shooter drill, but we did one today for our students. And so I think some of those stresses are different. I think it kind of frames the conversation differently. I think it kind of helps you digest things differently. And so, I think students now, ironically, I think they're dealing with more than what we had. And in a strange sense, they have less. Going back to what I said before, I'll make this part quick. I've given talks before about nothing within the academy is altruistic. We've done nothing just for the sake of doing it. Everything had to come at an exchange. The earliest former college were land-grant colleges. Rich white man with land shook hands with other rich white men with land, and they educated each other. When that well started to die out, all of a sudden they realized, oh, women can read. Maybe we should get them in here too. So they let women in, and that was working out. When that started to fizzle out, they realized, oh, Black people can read. Maybe we should get them into school too. And so they started working to get Black people into school. All of this was to stay relevant. As migratory shifts happened, as technology shifts happened, as people just kind of evolved and grow. Once, the Black well ran dry, they fell in love with, international students from China, and they brought them over, again, to stay relevant. Once that dried up, we fell in love with MOOCs and online open platforms of communication. And so I think in that regard, the academy, it works to stay relevant by, like most businesses, through opening the doors, kind of lifting the hood and welcoming people in under the guise of inclusion. And so how that plays out, for the navigation and contemporary challenges for Latinx students, Asian students, Black students, Native American students, white students. Again, they're being charged to do more with less. As the universities became more diverse, as the universities became more inclusive, a lot of the money kind of, went back. And so you saw a greater proliferation of loans. There are way more loans now than ever before. That it wasn't that way in the 20s and the 30s. You just went to school. And so now that a lot of the resources are claimed, now that a lot of the property is kind of soaked up, I think for, all of the young people that we just mentioned, they have to try to figure out their fit and where they can get in. I think if we're talking this idea of PTSD and what Dr. Kwame Bakanra at the University of Utah calls racial battle fatigue, this idea, again, of the messages being prevalent. We lived with George Floyd's execution. I'm of the age, I saw Rodney King's beating. Throughout history, there are books showing Black people hanging. And so I think this idea of imposter syndrome, I think this idea of fit and belonging becomes a bit more difficult. Maybe not so much for the white kids, but if we go up that list to the Asian, Native American, Black, Latinx, I think, the idea of how they navigate this terrain becomes a bit more tricky. I'm comforted in the belief that the human brain is incredibly complex. And It's that old saying that if you make a better mouse trap, essentially you create a better mouse. I think writ large, broadly speaking, as people of color, as marginalized populations, we are winning. And that's why the pushback is so strong. That's why you have DeSantis. That's why, I don't want to get too political. I don't see faces. It's hard to kind of get into this. But,
hey, go here. It's fine.
Yeah, I was trying, it just becomes a bit more tricky to navigate it. And I think with us winning the way we are, with us, as people of color becoming smarter, with us as people of color and marginalized people becoming more compassionate and understanding, I think with a lot of this hyper-connectedness, I think it is good. Even though it's noisy, it's good because we see it. And again, I'm old, so maybe it gets to me differently than it would a 21-year-old. But broadly speaking, we were of the generation that, it was easy to tap down a news story. It was easy to tap down incidents of police brutality. It was easy to tap down financial misdeeds. And I think at the rate that they bubble up now, I think it's a good thing. And maybe that's the old journalist in me from days of yore. But with those challenges, you just have to understand it. Earlier I mentioned this idea of disruption. Earlier I mentioned this idea of, having the ability to digest and understand disruption in whatever form it comes in real time. I think that's the biggest challenge of it all. I talked a bit ago about the idea of the school of life and the academy. And in the school of life, the test comes first. And then you learn the lesson, where within the academy, you can study and then take the test. I think a lot of those challenges for our people of color still exist because, and it's ironic, through all of the gains in technology, through all of the gains in communication, the undergird of racism still exists. We were watching racist acts on black and white TVs, and now we watch them on handheld 4K phones. And so I don't think that'll ever go away. I think it's a human ill, not to get too heavy or deep, but I think, racist people are no different than murderers or kidnappers or any kind of mental affliction that you have that triggers you for nothing. And as young people of color, especially young women who want to get into professional leadership, they're going to face obstacles and challenges that I can't even imagine, the same way I faced obstacles and challenges my mother couldn't imagine. And so I think within those challenges, and as you overcome contemporary challenges, and navigate your way through life, please, 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 please have a firm understanding of who you are. People will try to label you. People will try to kind of knock you off center, and you can never give them that footing over you. Even if in the moment it's perceived that you take a loss, go back, study, learn, and come back stronger the next day. That's how you navigate it. There is nothing that I can say within this conversation that will make it better. The only thing that I can say, ideally, is just continue to stay strong and, be ready. Sugar Free said, if you stay ready, you ain't got to get ready.
Hey.
So, stay ready,
Stay ready.
Yeah, and that's what it boils down to.
Thank you for that. Yeah, setup is a setback is a setup for a comeback, right?
Isn't it though?
Right?
Yeah.
Gotta stay prepared. One additional question, and perhaps there might be a couple of more before we wrap up here.
Yeah.
We know that within higher education, business models predominate.
Yeah.
It's about the money.
It is.
And that often runs counter to the ideologies and philosophies of many of us who see education as something that is transformative, emancipatory, liberatory. Given that dichotomy, how do you as a leader function within that kind of binary, those two extremes, polars, and how do you impart to young people the game, that we are functioning within a very complex game?
We are. I'll give you a real example. I'm working on budget for 24 and 25. And, you know, I'm not even done with 23. And so one of the professors, a guy who I like a lot, you know, Dr. Varlick calls me, they're putting on an event for CASA, and it's our anti-racist initiatives. And, you know, they really work with our students to kind of build them up. And, you know, he needed $1,000. And our budget is such that I just didn't have $1,000 laying around. And so last year, for our admitted students, we gave out lawn signs. You know, lawn signs were kind of a pandemic thing. I think it was kind of a moment in time, you know. And so very quickly, I thought, well, if I did away with the lawn signs, I'd pull back quite a bit of money and I can give Dr. Varlick $1,000. So sometimes it's just as basic as that. You know, you need 1,000, give me an hour, let me find it. You know, sometimes I think it's a bit more complex, especially when you're talking discount rates and financial aid and how you try to attract students into the fold. You know, a lot of those headaches, I really try to take on my shoulders. Again, I think our students of color, the curiosity has been tapped out of them so much. As much as possible within college, I want them to recapture that curiosity. And so I think financial considerations are real. I think, you know, for us working folk, budgets and money alignment are real. You know, I can tell you something that might be comforting. There's never enough money. I've worked at Humboldt State, William Paterson State, the University of Southern California, the University of Utah, now Arcadia University. Every single university I've worked at has talked about money woes. And again, being a first generation college student, I've heard this before, let's make it work. You know, I'll ditch the lawn signs, here's $1,000, have fun. And so that's how you kind of try to make it work. You know, I think on the student side, and I'm being serious, understand how the money works and understand the investment. I think if you learn one thing from the generation before you, me, Dr. Williams, Dr. Hollenside, understand the level of debt that we currently carry and understand how that looks when it's time to, you know, kind of give it back. Do not drop a tear for me. My life is good. But I think that had I better understood that aspect of it, I definitely would have managed it much differently. Every scholarship is important. If they're going to give you money for being an RA, do it. If they're going to give you money for writing a graduate study, take it. And, you know, money is one of those silly, silly little made up things. It's paper. It's not even backed by gold, but it drives us. And so like every silly thing that exists, understand how it works. If they pay you money, to a certain degree, the government's going to want it back, you know, when it's tax time. If they give you a student loan, they're going to want that money back, even though I'm praying Joe Biden works out a miracle. And I think that, you know, to really understand the weight and the realness of financial decisions is very important. And so I'm not sure if that answers your question, Doc. I drifted a bit there, but I think with respect to financing the education and understanding the way money operates, there are two sides of the coin. You know, the administrative side, let me take that on, but also within respect to the student side, understand how the dollars flow and understand if somebody gives you $1, at some point, they're going to want about 65 cents back.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's complex,
Yes.
you know, because within these systems, I think over these now almost 30 years of working in different institutions that money so heavily drives decision-making that we at times lose sight of the needs of populations.
We do. And it's funny, it goes back to what I said earlier. You know, in the 1920s and 30s, and I'll just say it bluntly, white people went to school for free. White people went to school for free in the 30s and the 40s. In the 50s, 60s, and 70s, civil rights, inclusion, equity, all of a sudden you had the introduction of loans. You had you know, a lot of that eroded. And that frames the conversation. You know, I think that you're right. You know, I monitor our discount rate. You know, a good chunk of our students are students of color. 40% of our applicant pool this year are students of color. And oftentimes, with more diversity means more money spent from your budget. That could be due to preparation, that could be due to pedigree, that could be due to a number of reasons. And I don't think we have time to get into all that here. But if you're trying to diversify and be more inclusive, you're going to spend more money. And to your point, it's unfortunate that sometimes, you know, gals and guys like me at the VP level, we kind of lose track of that. A lot of what I do is kind of push back on the idea of the discount rate. Now, in fair compliment to that, this is a business. And we have to kind of make sure things are, you know, fiduciary and financially sound. But to your point, at the crux of it, at the end of the day, we're here to serve a student population. And again, we're here to prepare a workforce for an enterprise that doesn't exist. So why would you sell yourself short in that regard? You know, I have these fantasies from time to time where I think, what if the world was truly equitable? And what if every person that was truly great in their own regard really got a chance to shine? I think we would be in flying cars right now. You know, I really think we would have answers to, you know, cyclical and systemic evils that exist, you know, short-sightedness, prejudice, racism. It just really erodes the underbelly of everything. And I think the crux of your question does get to that. You know, what do you value? You know, when people talk about, is this, you know, how much money are you spending? I think another way of saying is it worth it? You know, and 10 times out of 10, I think all young people are worth it. If we took a fraction of the defense fund, if we took a fraction of what police budgets are and just shoveled it towards local colleges and universities, I think a lot of that would be corrected, but it boils down to intentionality. And I do think, you know, I'm in higher ed, you're in higher ed, we're successful, but we need a lot more Hakeem Jeffries and a lot more AOCs, you know, kind of fighting the good fight on the hill. And again, I don't see faces, so maybe I'm you know, upsetting some people, but you know, it's never enough money, but it is a question of value and what do you value?
That's right. That's right. Thank you, sir. Thank you, sir. Any last questions? We are at our time here. Oh. I don't want to ignore or miss a student or colleague who may have a question. So any last questions for Vice President Rakin Hall? Mm-hmm. I see a thank you in the chat from
thank you guys.
Dr. Hollinside and several other folks.
Thanks, Dana. Appreciate it. Sophie, thank you. Liz, Rox, thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much for taking time out of your evening now, because we know it's evening over there for you, afternoon for us.
It is. It is.
To share and just enlighten us with your knowledge, your journey, your experience, the richness of that. I am so proud of you, so happy for you.
It's an honor to know you and call you a friend.
Oh, likewise, likewise. Thank you. Lots of thanks from our audience and
thanks, guys.
Reactions there. So you have a wonderful evening. Thank you to all of our students, staff members, and maybe even some faculty who desire to join us. And have a wonderful day.
Bye, guys. Take care.
Thank you so much. Thank you. It was an honor. Thank you.
My pleasure.
Thank you for your engagement in Profiles in Equity and Excellence. We hope to see you back in fall 2023. May peace be with you all.